My grandfather looked me dead in the eyes across the dinner table and said, "I've been wiring $3,000 into your account every single month for 4 years." I set down my fork. The table went quiet, not the comfortable kind of quiet that settles over a family after everyone's eaten too much. The sharp kind. The kind where someone's about to cry or someone's about to run. I looked at my grandfather. Then I looked at my mother. Then I looked at my husband. My husband was staring at his plate. I did the math in my head before I could stop myself. $3,000, 48 months, $144,000. My throat closed. What account? I asked. My grandfather didn't answer right away. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, the brown one he always wears to family dinners, the one that smells like cedar and pipe tobacco even though he hasn't smoked in 20 years, and he pulled out a folded envelope. He set it on the table between the bread basket and the gravy boat, and he flattened it with his palm the way you'd smooth out a map before a long trip. "That's what I'd like to know," he said. "Let me back up, because to understand the dinner, you have to understand the 4 years that came before it. I'm a nurse. I graduated at 24, started working at a hospital outside Columbus, Ohio, and by 27, I was pulling double shifts 3 times a week because I had to. My student loans were brutal. My car was a 2009 Honda with a slow oil leak I kept meaning to fix. I ate a lot of pasta. I clipped coupons from a Sunday paper I shared with my neighbor because neither of us could justify the full subscription price. I wasn't miserable. I want to be clear about that. I loved my job. I loved my small apartment with the drafty windows and the radiator that clanked every night at 2 a.m. like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. I had good friends. I had a life. But I was tired. The kind of tired that gets into your bones when you're in your late 20s and working yourself into the ground and wondering if this is just what adulthood feels like, or if you missed some turn somewhere. My grandfather, I've always called him Pop, everyone does, had done well for himself. He built a small construction company in western Pennsylvania starting in the 70s, worked it for 30 years, sold it, invested carefully. He wasn't flashy about it. He drove a sensible truck and bought store-brand cereal and argued with waiters about coffee refills. But he had money, and more importantly, he was thoughtful about what he did with it. When I turned 26, he called me on a Sunday afternoon. He said he'd been thinking about my situation. He said he knew how hard the first few years out of school could be, especially in healthcare, especially with the debt I was carrying. He said he wanted to help. "I'm going to send you $3,000 a month," he told me. "Not forever, just until you get stable. 5 years, maybe less if you don't need it. You don't have to thank me. You don't have to account for every dollar. Just get yourself on solid ground." I cried. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and I cried because I was so relieved and because I hadn't realized how close to the edge I'd been running until someone offered me a ledge to stand on. "Pop," I said, "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he said. "Just save some of it." I told my husband that night. We'd been married 2 years by then. He seemed happy for me. He kissed my forehead and said that was amazing, that Pop was an amazing man, and that things were going to get a lot easier now. The next month, I waited for the deposit. It didn't come. I figured there was a delay. Bank stuff. I didn't ask Pop about it directly because that felt awkward. Like asking someone if they'd actually sent the birthday check or just said they would. I gave it another month. Nothing. I called my mother. I asked, carefully, whether she'd heard anything from Pop about the money he'd mentioned sending me. She said she'd look into it. She sounded a little flustered, which I didn't read into at the time because my mother is always a little flustered. 2 days later, she called back. She said Pop had wired the first transfer and that it had apparently gone to the wrong account number, a clerical error at the bank. She said she was handling it. She said not to worry. I thanked her. I felt a little embarrassed for asking at all. The next month, nothing again. I called my mother again. She gave me a different explanation. Something about Pop's bank switching systems, a hold on wire transfers, a form that needed to be resubmitted. She said she was the one managing it because Pop wasn't great with the online banking interface and had asked her to help coordinate. She said she'd make sure the next transfer went through and that the missed months would be caught up. I believed her. She was my mother. She was organized and competent and had managed every family logistics situation I could remember since I was 7 years old. If she said she was handling it, I believed she was handling it. So I kept working. I kept doing doubles. I kept patching the oil leak myself with a can of stop leak fluid from the auto parts store. I told myself the money was coming and that things were going to get easier. Months passed. The explanations kept changing. There was always a reason, always something that was almost resolved. I stopped asking as much because every time I did, I came away feeling like I was being ungrateful, like I was pestering my own mother over money that was supposed to be a gift, not a transaction. And somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting it entirely. I told myself Pop had probably changed his mind, that he'd thought better of it, or that his finances had shifted, or that he'd decided some other family member needed it more. I felt a low-grade shame about the whole thing that I couldn't quite name, like I'd done something wrong by needing it in the first place. I never brought it up with Pop directly. I didn't want him to feel bad if he'd had to pull back the offer. I didn't want to seem like I was chasing his money. I loved him. I didn't want anything to be weird between us. So I just let it go. That was my first mistake, not my last. My husband and I had bought a house by the time the dinner happened, a small one, in a neighborhood that was technically up and coming but was taking its time about it. We'd stretched ourselves to make the down payment work. I had gone back to working doubles. My husband was in sales, inconsistent income, good months and bad months, and the bad months had been coming more frequently. We hosted the family dinner because my mother suggested it, which should have been a flag but wasn't. My parents drove in from Pittsburgh. Pop drove himself, which at 81 he still insisted on doing and which still gave everyone mild anxiety. It was a Thursday in November. I made a pot roast. I was still in my scrubs when they arrived because my shift had run long, and I changed quickly while my mother fussed over the kitchen and my husband poured wine. Pop sat at the head of the table because that's where Pop always sat, in every house, at every dinner, for my entire life. He was quieter than usual. I noticed, but I was busy bringing food out, so I filed it away. We ate. We talked about normal things. My cousin's new baby. Whether my parents were going to renovate their bathroom. The weather. My husband was charming and funny and kept refilling glasses, and the conversation moved the way good conversation does when the food is warm and the room is familiar. And then Pop put down his fork. He didn't clear his throat or make a production of it. He just stopped eating and looked at me and said what he said. $3,000 a month, 4 years, every single month. He pushed the envelope across the table to me. Inside were 4 years of bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, amounts, dates, account numbers. Every month's outgoing from his account. Clean documentation in the way that Pop does everything. He'd numbered the pages with a label maker. The account the money had been going to was not mine. I knew the account number. I recognized the last 4 digits. I'd seen them on a bill once, years ago, sitting on the kitchen counter at my parents' house. It was my mother's personal account. The room was very still. I looked at my mother. She had picked up her wine glass and was looking at the tablecloth. I looked at my husband. He was looking at his phone under the table, which he pulled out at some point in the last 90 seconds. I hadn't noticed until now. "Mom," I said. She didn't look up. "Mom, Mom." "It went toward family expenses," she said finally, to the tablecloth. "Your father's business had a rough patch. We needed to stabilize. Pop would have wanted." "Don't," Pop said, quietly, just that one word. My mother stopped. "I sent that money for my granddaughter," Pop said. He wasn't yelling. Pop never yelled. He had a way of being more frightening when he was calm. "I made that very clear. I spoke to you directly. You told me she had a joint account set up for exactly this purpose, and that you were coordinating it for her because she was too busy with work to manage the transfers herself. You gave me that account number." My mother said nothing. "I called the bank 3 days ago," Pop said. "They confirmed every transfer. $144,000. Over 4 years. $144,000. I heard the number like it was coming from a long distance. I thought about the oil leak, the pasta dinners, the double shifts, the down payment we bled ourselves to scrape together. I had a lawyer look at the transfers," Pop continued. "It's straightforward. What you did has a name." My mother looked up for the first time. She looked older suddenly. Or maybe I was just seeing her clearly for the first time. "Pop," she started, "we were going to pay it back." "When?" he asked. She didn't answer. "When?" he asked again, not louder, just cleaner. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I could hear my own breathing. My father, who had not said a single word since Pop began speaking, reached for his wine glass and drank the whole thing. I've already been in contact with my attorney, Pop said. He was looking at me now, not at my mother. I wanted you to know first. Before anything official happened, I wanted to tell you myself. I realized I was gripping the edge of the table. I let go. Did you know? I asked my husband. He was still looking at his phone. His jaw was very tight. Did you know, I said again, that the money wasn't coming to me? He set the phone face down on the table. He didn't look at me. Your mom mentioned something about it being managed centrally, he said. I didn't ask questions. Centrally, I repeated. It wasn't my place. It is literally your place, I said. You're my husband. He didn't say anything else. I've thought about that moment a lot in the months since. He hadn't stolen from me. He hadn't set up the account or redirected the transfers. But he had known something was wrong, and he had decided, deliberately, not to ask questions, not to tell me. He had watched me work double shifts and eat pasta and stress about the down payment, and he had said nothing. That's a particular kind of betrayal. Not dramatic, just quiet. The kind that sits in the walls of a marriage and makes the whole structure soft. What happened after that dinner happened quickly. The way these things do once they start moving. Pop's attorney filed a civil claim within the week. My mother, to her credit, did not try to fight it. Whether out of genuine remorse or because the documentation was airtight, I can't say. Probably the latter. The $144,000 came back, not all at once. My parents had spent a significant portion. Renovations, a car, a vacation to Portugal I'd seen photos of on Facebook, a kitchen remodel that my mother had described to me as finally updating the old place. But assets were liquidated. It took several months. It came back. My mother called me twice during that period. The first time, she said she was sorry. She said things had gotten out of hand. She used words like complicated and unintentional and context. And I sat on the phone and let her talk because I didn't have anything to say. The second time, she called to ask if I was going to cut her out of my life. I said I didn't know yet. That was honest. I still don't entirely know. What she did was clear. How I feel about it is not. My father never called. My husband and I separated 4 months after the dinner. It wasn't a single-issue thing. No marriage ends over a single thing. But the phone under the table was part of it. And his explanation when I finally pressed him was worse than I'd hoped. He'd known for almost a year. My mother had told him because she wanted someone to run interference if I ever brought it up around Pop. He'd agreed. He thought, he said, that it would all work itself out eventually. I filed in the spring. Pop bought me a condo. I didn't ask him to. He called me one afternoon and said he wanted to, and that I shouldn't argue with him about it. I argued anyway. He bought it. It's in a building 3 miles from the hospital, with a washer and dryer in the unit and windows that actually keep the cold out. And I stood in it the day I got the keys and I cried again, like I'd cried on my kitchen floor 4 years earlier. Except this time, it wasn't relief. It was something harder to name. Grief for the years I'd spent not knowing. Gratitude that felt almost too big to hold. Anger that had nowhere to go. A combination of all three, maybe. I cried until I was empty, and then I went to the window and looked out at the street, and I felt, underneath all of it, something quieter. Something like solid ground. The oil leak had eventually taken out the whole engine. I'd sold the Honda for parts 2 years ago. I drive a used Subaru now, nothing special, but it runs clean. I paid for it myself. Pop called on a Sunday a few weeks after I moved in. We talked for an hour about nothing. About the hospital, about a book he was reading, about whether the new coffee shop near his house was as good as everyone was saying. Normal things. Easy things. The kind of conversation where you're not saying what matters most directly, but you're saying it anyway, underneath everything. Before he hung up, he said, I should have sent it directly to you from the start. Pop, I said. I know, I trusted the wrong person. I should have verified. I'm sorry. I thought about saying it wasn't his fault. I thought about saying it didn't matter. I said neither of those things because he didn't need absolution and he wouldn't have believed either one. You were paying attention, I said instead. You caught it. He was quiet for a moment. You're my granddaughter, he said. Of course I was paying attention. Some things, once broken, you can't rebuild into the same shape. You rebuild them into something different, something that shows the repair. I think that's okay. I think that might even be the point. I start my next shift in 6 hours. I have leftovers in the refrigerator and a plant on the windowsill that is, against all reasonable expectation, still alive. My apartment is quiet, and it is mine. For the first time in 4 years, I feel like I can breathe. I keep coming back to the envelope. The way Pop smoothed it flat against the tablecloth, like he'd been carrying it for a long time and wanted to put it down carefully. He hadn't come to that dinner angry. He'd come prepared. There's a difference, and I think about that difference more than I expected to. What my mother did had a clean legal name. What my husband did was harder to categorize, but it sat heavier in some ways. The passive agreement, the silence held in place year after year while I worked doubles and worried about the down payment and told myself the money must have just fallen through. He knew. He chose quiet over honest, and that choice had a cost neither of us fully understood until the bill came due. I'm not interested in calling any of this karma in some cosmic, prearranged sense. I don't think the universe was keeping score. What I do think is that choices compound. My mother made one decision and then had to make 10 more to protect it. Each one borrowed against something: trust, relationship, her own sense of herself, probably. By the time Pop set that folder on the table, the debt had grown into something she couldn't negotiate her way out of. That's not fate. That's arithmetic. Pop's move was the thing that stays with me most. He didn't call to confront her. He didn't forward me the bank statements and let me handle it. He quietly hired someone to pull the records, organized them with a label maker, drove himself to dinner at 81 years old, and chose exactly the right moment to lay it all out. He'd been watching without making a show of watching. That kind of patience isn't passive. It's a form of care that most people never learn to practice. He paid attention because he thought I was worth paying attention to. I didn't know, until that Thursday in November, how much I needed someone to have been doing that. I spent a long time being someone who absorbed difficulty without asking whether I deserved it. The oil leak, the pasta, the doubles. I'd built a private pride around not complaining, around handling it, and somewhere in that pride I'd stopped asking whether what I was handling was actually mine to carry. That's the part I'm working on now, the difference between endurance and self-erasure. They can look the same from the outside and feel the same from the inside, and one of them is a virtue and the other is just damage, with good posture. The condo is quiet in the mornings. I have a window that faces east and a radiator that does not clank at 2 a.m. I have a plant on the sill that I water on Thursdays, and that is inexplicably thriving. Small things. But I earn them in the truest sense. Not because I suffered for them, but because I finally stopped accepting less and started building something real. Pop told me he should have sent the money directly. I told him he caught it. Both things are true, and we have learned to hold them at the same time, which is maybe what it looks like when two people who love each other decide to be honest instead of comfortable. I don't know what I would have done with $144,000 at 26. Probably paid down the loans. Probably fixed the car. Probably exhaled for the first time in years. I'll never know. But I know what I did without it, and I know who I became in the process. And I am not sure I would trade the person for the money. Though I reserve the right to be angry that I had to choose.